so much to everyone who invited me to come and give this talk. So for those who don't know me, I'm Charlotte Carrington-Farmer. I'm an assistant professor of history here at Roger Williams University. My specialism is early American history and the early modern Atlantic world. And I'm going to talk to you about strategies for flexible integration of community engagement into course design. So I've got a few topics that I'm going to talk to you about. They said I had 50 minutes, but I think I'm probably only going to talk for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and then given the wonderfully small numbers, we'll have a little bit more time for Q&A. So these are some of the topics that I want to hit in the next 20 minutes or half an hour. So I want to talk to you a little bit about integrating CPC into an existing course. I want to talk to you about the process I went through of creating a standalone CPC class. I want to talk to you about my own personal experience of trying to collaborate across the disciplines, and then make a few comments about the highs and lows of CPC. So I'm going to start then with some of the existing classes, and again I'm drawing from my examples from history. So the first time that I did a CPC class was a couple of years ago when CPC was just a new thing on campus, and it sounded really exciting to me because it was the type of stuff I was already doing, right? I was already taking students to the archives, always trying to form partnerships with local historical societies. So basically at the very last minute, I heard of this project that Central Falls wanted someone to find out about a battle that happened there in King Philip's War. And just by happy accident, I was teaching my Facing East from Indian Country and Native History of Early America class at that time. And so the course had already gone through. We were meeting twice a week for an hour and 20. And I just thought, we'll give it a go, right? This sounds really exciting. I had no idea really what I was letting myself in for, but everyone seemed really enthusiastic about it. So at the very last minute, I tweaked my syllabus. I kind of shoved this in for 4 weeks within there, and we were already doing a project about King Philip's War, and so it worked perfectly to focus on a specific battle within there. So it seemed like a win-win for me. Some of the problems I had, I guess, when I just kind of last minute inserted it in was the fact that my class met twice a week for an hour and 20, and the practicalities of getting to the archives, the practicalities of getting just to go and see the battle site was just very difficult. I had to rely on student goodwill of going out of class time. I had to give a lot of my own personal time to go and take them to the archives to go and meet with the archaeologists that we were working with. So that was my first experience of doing that. And so I learned a lot from that, and the meeting I'm going to right now after this is exactly the same as what happened before. So I said I learned from my mistakes, but then I am doing the same thing again. I'm teaching this exact same class right now, and at the very last minute when all of the scheduling had gone through, I heard through the president and one of our members of the board that there was this opportunity to partner with the historic preservation officer of the Narragansett tribe on a project that needed handling basically right now. It was a time-sensitive land issue, and they wanted to draw on land deeds from the 17th and 18th century, which is exactly my area. So against my better judgment, again, I'm in this position where I'm teaching the same class. We're meeting twice a week for an hour and 20, and I've now shoehorned at the last minute this CPC project in. So I don't know how well that's going to go, and I'll talk more about this in the highs and lows. So my first experience was inserting this in there into a history class that just happened to fit with that topic. The other time that I've inserted CPC into an existing class was much more deliberate and much more thought out. So one of the classes that history majors have to take that's a requirement is essentially training them to be historians, right? And it's called Dimensions of History. This class I think is perfect for a CPC project because it meets twice a week for 3 hours. So you have 2 blocks of time where you can get off campus and go to the archives and do what you need to do. So when I integrated CPC into Dimensions of History, and I've got some pictures here, that's the Navajo, that's King Philip's War. Yeah, I'll come to this in a second. So the 2 times I've done it worked actually very, very well. The first time I did Dimensions was 2 years ago, and we did a project working with the town of Warren on their early oyster industry. So a group of business owners basically came to the university and said, hey, you know, like we'd like to know more about Warren's early oyster industry. Do you have anyone who'd take on this research? And I'd already planned to do a CPC project. I was just waiting for the right one to fit in. So I'd already got this scheduled. I already knew that every Friday afternoon, kind of half of the semester, we'd be working out on site. So we did this project. And I think it went reasonably well. They presented the project, they worked with the people in Warren. We didn't get all of the research done, so what happened was one of the students did an independent study with me over the summer to finish this research off. So again, I'll talk a bit more about independent studies. So I inserted this into Dimensions of History, and I think I really learned that it works well with a class and then a lab. I think that's one of the things that I learned. The second time we did this, so this is Dimensions of History. The second time I taught this was last spring. Again, I'd had a really good experience with the Warren oyster industry. So we worked with Bristol Historic and Preservation Society. Again, they came to us with a project. They wanted the history of General Burnside researching, right? He's a Civil War guy. They had, I guess, a couple of specific projects in mind. So you can see Ryan here. This is one of our history majors in the archives reading the 19th century manuscripts, and then here he is all happy, like presenting his research. So again, this worked really well. We met, what I learned from the first time I inserted this into a lab was that half a semester wasn't enough for a CPC project. The student evals were, we really enjoyed this, but this was really stressful trying to fit this in for half a semester. I wish we'd used all of the lab element for the CPC. So again, learning from those evals and informal feedback from students, I dedicated pretty much the whole of the semester lab towards doing the CPC project. We did a little bit of training. I mean, this is mid-19th century handwriting, so the paleography skills aren't too taxing, but I really needed to train them about going into the archives, like searching for things, like dealing with land deeds or whatever it might be, like reading the handwriting, knowing that U's and V's are interchangeable, knowing what a long S looks like. So training in the skills was necessary before we went in there. And so we had a couple of weeks in the classroom and doing some trial work upstairs in the archives with Heidi Benedict to kind of prepare. So I think that went reasonably well. This culminated in a big presentation down at the State House. One of the things that the students did was they basically every Friday afternoon, they spent Friday afternoon at Bristol Historic and Preservation Society working with Catherine Zipp, who was here but is now in charge of BH and PS, going through and doing cataloguing work. So basically they had this whole bunch of stuff like guns, swords, uniforms, memorabilia tied to the Civil War and Burnside, and so it was just kind of left in one of their rooms, and their job was to basically sort through it, enter it into the database, take pictures. Another group then did a different project. They were really interested in bringing Burnside to life for the rest of Rhode Island, so they designed a drive-in tour that people could do. So there were parameters that BHPS set for us, but there was freedom within those parameters to do something. So I think that worked really well with the students, that they had this general theme of, you know, Civil War general, but they could take it in a way that was of interest to them. So I think, again, thinking about what the impact of this is it's amazing for me when I'm trying to write references for students when they're applying for museum positions or grad school, to be able to say, actually, yeah, they've already done cataloguing. They know how the archives work. Yeah, okay, they're going to do a dissertation on 17th century New England sources. They know how the paleography works. They've been in the archives with me. They've answered new questions that I didn't know the answer to. So I think for me and for them, the trade-off is really, really worth it. And I think one of the things I'll talk about a bit later is and I'll come back to Navajo Nation, is I would give you advice of don't take a topic that you're not interested in. I was really into King Philip's War, so that was wonderful for me. I had the really specific 17th century Native American knowledge. I know nothing about oysters, right? I mean, it's kind of early American history. I didn't really know much about Warren, apart from it's a town I drive through every day to work. And, you know, I knew it had a whaling history, which was much more interesting to me. But it seemed like the best out of a bunch of projects to take. So it was really hard between me and you guys for me to be passionate about oystering. Right? I'm vegetarian. I've never eaten an oyster. I don't even know anything about the process. So I myself had to be really comfortable with my students and say, I am not an oyster expert. Like, let's go and read the Board of Trade journals together and try and figure out what this specific process of oystering is about. So I'd encourage you to try and be selective with the projects. I have this kind of gung-ho approach where I'm like, I'll say yes to everything and then regret it like a few days later. So I would encourage you to take projects that you genuinely care about. And the Bristol Historic Preservation Society was pretty great, right? I work on the 17th, 18th century, so it was a little bit of a stretch for me to do the Civil War, but it was something that I found interesting as a scholar. So building on my experience from the Facing East class, it became really clear to me that I never wanted to be in the situation again where I was randomly inserting a CPC project, which I am in now. So I thought I'd learned from my mistake, but I haven't. So on the back of that, I talked to my department chair at the time and said, what I'd really like to do is, in line with the rest of the university, create a standalone CPC class. And, you know, I guess that this was the time when the president was giving the university message out, CPC was growing, it seemed like really the right thing to do. So I tried this a couple of years ago, and so we had a 3-credit class that met once a week, which was, again, my department chair fought really hard to make sure that it met just once a week. It caused real problems with the scheduling to block that out, but I feel like having a really strong department chair really helped create that space in the schedule. So we met once a week for 3 hours, and that gave us time to take on this project. So we took on what was, I think, one of my favorite projects. We worked with Newport Restoration Foundation on a project on some 18th century houses that they have down in Newport. So everyone thinks of the Gilded Age houses, right? The cottages, the breakers, all of that. What we were looking at was the houses that no one else really talks about, right? The 18th century, some really early 18th century houses. And so again, having tried to learn from some of my other projects, I'm not a historic preservation person, right? I don't know about the style of houses and what that means in terms of time and period. So what made this project work really well was that we partnered with a group led by Catherine Zipp, who was in historic preservation at the time, and they did the same CPC project as us simultaneously. But they took the houses and did the historic preservation element of the house, right, how it changed over time, what the architecture meant. And my history students were able to research the lives of the people living in the houses. So I think that worked really well. It was amazing to build those ties with historic preservation. It worked really well in terms of we have a dedicated 3-hour window where we do have time to get to Newport, to go to the archives and, you know, pull apart the land deeds and stuff like that. So you can see the students walking around the houses, you can see the students in the archives. And so I think that worked really well of creating this standalone class. Right now I'm on the SHE curriculum committee trying to get through all of the history changes, part of which is putting this CPC history class onto our formal curriculum so it will appear in the catalogue. There is precedent for that. I think the example I know is graphic design, like they have that and it's just integrated into the curriculum. So I'm hopeful that that will make sense for history, that you'll just have this standalone CPC that will be variable topics that students will be able to take time and time again. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, good. The other way that I've taught CPC then is to run it as an independent study. So simultaneously to running Newport Restoration Foundation as a standalone class, again, it seems like it happens a lot last minute, but we got basically a contact from the Herreshoff Maritime Museum who reached out to us and said, we've got this great project, we want someone to write about early women in sailboat racing. And so I had a group of 6 students who kind of got wind of this project and really wanted to run with it. One of them was a sailor himself. 2 of the students were really interested in women's history. A couple of the other students had their eye on grad school and hadn't done a CPC project and really wanted that on their CV. They wanted that archival experience. So we made it work, and I ran it as an independent study with these 6 students. So again, that had its pros and cons, right? Simultaneously, the class was running, and we had 3 hours a week where all of us were free and we could go down to the archives. That wasn't the case with the Herreshoff project. We had to, as a group, carve out time to go down. We had to spend a lot of time in Connecticut at Mystic Seaport in their archives for this project. We had to spend quite a bit of time up in Providence at the public library there, and obviously some time in Bristol. So I guess my comment about doing independent studies is it's wonderful. It means that you've got the freedom, but you as a professor have then got to figure out that timing and scheduling with students who might already have a really hectic schedule. What ended up playing out with the Herreshoff research was that they split into 2 groups. One group focused on British women in early sailboat racing in the America's Cup, and the other group focused on the American women. And so they would go to the archives. Like I got to know the curator at Mystic, and I would send them without me. They would go down in their own car. It would be kind of an unofficial thing. So that was great. I mean, that was slightly terrifying, sending them off without me to supervise and guide. But I think, again, it was a really good learning experience for them. Again, this culminated, all of these projects culminate in some type of a presentation. So I'll kind of go back and then go forward. So the King Philip's War one, that was the exception. We didn't have a big presentation. What happened was graphic design took that and then ran with that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the Warren oyster industry, we had a big presentation at the George Hale Library in Warren. So again, for my students, it looks amazing on their CV that they can say that they've already done public speaking, they've interacted with the public, they've been forced to answer really difficult questions from members of the public, like really pulling apart their project. So I think it's really good preparation for them. The Bristol one, we had a big presentation at the Bristol State House. Perhaps the most glamorous presentation we had was at Doris Duke's Rough Point, the big mansion down the street from the Breakers, where we presented with Newport Restoration Foundation. And then the Herreshoff one was at the Herreshoff Museum. They did a big evening lecture for us. So these are the 3 ways that I've run CPC, right? Integrating it into a class, just a regular history class that's in my specialism, facing east, integrating it into the big general training people to be a historian class with the lab, and then creating the standalone class, which was the Newport Restoration Foundation example, and then thirdly doing independent studies. So they're the 3 ways that I've tried to integrate CPC into my classes. I'll talk a little bit now about collaboration. So I mentioned that I was able to collaborate with historic preservation with Newport Restoration Foundation. The first example, though, I'll talk about, which is graphic design, which is the second one on there. So my students did all of this research about this particular battle that took place in Central Falls in the midst of King Philip's War. And I mean, there's really not that much written. I feel like as a specialist, you have to know where to look. There are published sources. There's a lot of archival material. But a lot of it with Native American history is being an ethno-historian, where you have to take into account oral traditions. You have to work with archaeologists. You have to kind of truly understand that the English sources that you're reading are wildly biased. They have this very Eurocentric lens. So it was a really good learning activity for my students. So we did this project and we made suggestions then. The City of Central Falls basically wanted to put up signage. They wanted a sign where the battle site was, and they wanted to develop a brochure that people could kind of learn a bit about this particular battle. And they maybe wanted to develop some web content. So I'm a good historian, right? I am not creative. I know nothing about building websites. I could do you a Word document pamphlet, but it's not going to look very glamorous, right? It's going to look terrible. terrible. And so what happened was my students did all the history research, and then we passed it on to another group of students who are trained to make brochures, who are trained to develop websites, who are trained to make signs look aesthetically pleasing and informative. So what was really cool was we passed it on to a group of graphic design students, and they took all the research that we did. We gave them all the dates and the information. They put together a really cool sign for a timeline. They pulled some really cool images that we sent and made the text look really pleasing. They turned all our research into a brochure. So it was really exciting for me to kind of see that passed on. I feel like Central Falls hasn't followed, so maybe this is a bit on the highs and lows. That hasn't actually happened yet. So Central Falls is still in the midst, I guess, of dealing with this. And I guess I'll talk more about the highs and lows a little bit later. The Newport Restoration Foundation stuff, the collaboration, did result in real change. The research that we did has been integrated into the walking tours that they actually offer around Newport. So when people do a walking tour, they'll learn about the people who we researched in the house. Again, I'll flip back. This one then, one of the kind of positives was that so we did this whole research project on early women in sailboat racing. I feel like maybe you can speak to this, Arnold. There are particular things about the Herreshoff. They have many projects that lots of us have worked on, and it always seems that there's more work. And so they haven't had this exhibition up. My students did a whole, I guess, exhibition guide about what should be included, what signs should go up, what images they should use. That hasn't gone up to the best of my knowledge. So again, this is perhaps one of the highs and lows. Like, I like to see it all finished and completed, and you do all this work and you give this presentation, and sometimes it takes time, and these are two examples of that. So I've talked about that. This one is great. Like, they've taken all the Burnside stuff. They are really pleased. All of the cataloguing has gone in. We've got an entry, a credit line on there. People are doing some of the drive-in tours. So that's really exciting to see that come through to completion. This stuff, signage has gone up in Warren, actually. So that's really exciting to see that through. And then I've just talked about that. So that's collaboration and I guess following through. The other example I'll briefly talk about is something that I've got part of my advanced Hassenfeld fellowship for, which is trying to integrate some of this into Gen Ed, right? You've heard me talk about history, 300 level classes, whatever. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with what's going on in Gen Ed. A big part of it is the Roger Seminar, learning about our wonderful namesake. And so I wanted to try and bring some of that into that. It's a big point of frustration for me that seeing the statues of Roger and knowing that Roger wanted to be known for his words, not, what he looked like. He never sat for a portrait. So it's been on my mind for a while to have some type of, monument to his words of some kind. And I've been mulling it around for a while. And then I kind of got a kick along with this when a friend of mine, Julie Fisher, took on a project with Roger Williams National Memorial this past year to research Roger and his interactions with the Indigenous peoples here. And so she and I got talking about doing something about Roger and his words, maybe, bringing some letters to campus, and then that got me thinking, like, maybe we could do more than that. So what's happening is next month in April, Julie Fisher, who's this 17th century ethno-historian, paleography expert, is coming to campus to launch this project. We're bringing in original letters from Rhode Island Historical Society that Roger wrote, and we're going to do a whole thing on paleography in the 17th century. And we're going to do this with my Gen Ed classes, right? Just regular Core 102, because it's not the fall. I don't have Roger people. And I'm also going to bring in some history students. And so this is going to launch this whole idea of Roger and his words, which come the fall, when I do have my Roger seminar, I'm going to work with those students to figure out what are Roger Williams' most important words, right? What does he say that we all should on this campus know? What do people say about him that we should all know? And I'm really keen to present this really colourful story of Roger's life in words that he says and words people say about him. And I don't want it to be just amazingly nice quotes about separation of church and state, religious freedom, and him getting on with the indigenous peoples, right? There will be that element in this project, whatever it looks like, but I really want to acknowledge that he enslaves indigenous people. I really want to acknowledge that whilst he has this amazing relationship with his mentor, Edward Cook, his daughter hates him and says, you know, if you ever come back to England, you're going to hang. So I really want that to be part of it, and I really want to talk about Roger as a failed lover, right, when he's writing to what he wants to be his first wife, but it's not, it doesn't work out, and he gets rebuffed because he's not of a high enough social rank. So I want to create this kind of snapshot of Roger's life from all of these words, again working with Rhode Island Historical Society on the original transcriptions that we've got of this. And so I'm kind of waffling here, I'm really excited about this, I could talk about this for hours, but what's going to happen is my students are going to do the research, right? What words do we need to know by and about Roger Williams, and then building on the Central Falls example, we're going to pass that to graphic design students, and they're going to make this look cool, right? Like, I don't know what they're going to do because I'm not skilled creatively like that, but they're going to put together a piece of art, several pieces of typography to try and give Roger some type of lasting memorial, I guess, on this campus. So that's how I'm going to try and integrate CPC into Gen Ed, right, through the Roger seminar, working with Rhode Island Historical Society on some of these letters. Does anyone have any questions so far? I'm just keeping an eye on the clock, it's past. All right, I guess I've talked a little bit about the highs and lows so far, but I guess I'll talk about a few more specific ones. I guess before I go into this, I will say the highs definitely outweigh the lows for CPC, like 100%. That's why I keep signing up to do them, right? The highs definitely outweigh the lows. One of the things that's really cool, I'm going to talk about the highs and then talk about the lows and then try and end with something positive. So I'll start with the highs. So this is the Newport Daily News. This came out a couple of days after we did the Newport Restoration Foundation presentation, and you know, we made the front cover, right? Roger Williams University students dig into the past of Newport Restoration Foundation properties. So again, when I'm writing references for students, they can like include this. They've got all the skills, but they've got this big presentation that they did, and they can say, oh, you made the front cover of the local newspaper with all of this work that we did. I know that a couple of students have definitely, I wouldn't say it's the only reason they got into grad school or it's the only reason they got a particular job, but I know that it's something that the employees and grad school people have said, you did what as an undergrad? You were in the archives, you did that, you know how that works. So I feel like for them it does have a real impact. And again, especially if you're going in the field of early American history, I know I didn't have this experience as an undergrad, right? My paleography skills as an undergrad were poor. I didn't get to go in the archives. So I think it really does set our students apart. I guess the big presentations are a huge high. I'll talk about the lows and I'll come back to the highs. So some of the lows then, I guess, are reading some of my evaluations. I just submitted my tenure file, so I read every evaluation ever about my teaching. And some of the CPC classes, the students were harsh, right? They said that this was so much work. Like, the expectations were so high, we didn't understand the real world pressure, right? They had a harsh experience in, if they miss a deadline, it's not just 5% a day late penalty. There's an exterior organization that's saying, we needed that content for the web, or we can't run this tour because you haven't done this, or if you've cataloged this sword as 1825 when it's 1826, like, that really matters. It's not just going to affect your grade, it's got real world implications, which, you know, I think that's great. I think that's good for them to learn that, but they were like, okay, this is a lot. The other low, I would say, I've had this happen a couple of times, is that the partner changes the expectations, right? At the start of the meeting, you'll be like, oh, you know, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and everyone's friendly and smiley, and then you get into the project and the goals shift. And then your job as a professor is trying to, I guess, walk that fine line, negotiating with the partner who now wants this, and the students who are like, I've already got 25 deadlines for however many classes I'm taking, like, stop giving me extra work. And again, this comes across in the evaluation. So working with, let me give you an example, with Bristol Historic and Preservation Society, we'd agreed that we were doing the Burnside project. In the midst of this, they injected in that they wanted any reference to Burnside that came up in the Bristol Phoenix in this 10-year period transcribing. Like, that's not a hard job, right? That's not hard, right? It's searchable, the Phoenix. You can just type it in and it'll bring them up. It's just very time consuming, right? For them, it's a great resource, right? It means they'll have this wonderful Word document and they'll be able to, display it, but that wasn't part of the project. All of the students were going to do their own thing, and now they got this chunk of the Phoenix to go through. So I, as a professor, had to walk that fine line, like rein in the Historic Preservation Society's expectations, tell my students that we're going to try and do this, how is this going to affect your grade, and like really kind of calm them down. But that's a real problem that I guess I found. Also, I mean, the students have to work with, I found, people they don't get along with. I feel like an example is the Herreshoff Museum. There was, I guess, one individual who the students came into contact a lot with at the Herreshoff who wasn't the ideal partner, who was highly critical of some of the work that the students did, who had grand expectations about organisation and what we were going to be able to produce in a semester, and didn't beat about the bush in telling the students. So that was really hard. Again, like, you're trying to stick up for your students, but you're also trying to hold them accountable. So again, the highs and lows of, like, I guess you have to walk this fine line, and to say sometimes you are going to have these really difficult conversations with people, and you are going to be the one who gets caught in the middle. What else can I say? Oh yeah, last minute projects. I'm dashing off to a meeting in 25 minutes to talk about a very last minute project. So the project we're about to take on is in this Native American history class that I'm teaching, and basically through the president and the board of trustees, we got wind of this project that the Narragansett basically need help on. I, as a historian of 17th century New England, have been desperate to make a connection to the tribe, and I've been trying with the Narragansett since I got this job in 2012. It's really hard, and so when the preservation officer for the tribe was like, oh yeah, we'll partner with you, I was like, I'm dropping everything, like, we're going to make this work. It's fate that I'm teaching my Native American history class this semester. We've already got something going on over spring break, but I'm gonna make this work. And so again, one of the real lows is, like, how? Arnold and I will tell you at 4 o'clock. Is that right, Arnold? We'll know how we're going to make it work at 4. But I guess the message I'm trying to say is one of the lows is some of it's unexpected, but I feel like it's just that flexibility and saying you're going to try the best you can do within the parameters that you have. And then also the final thing I'll say before I'll take a few questions is the long-term partnerships, right? I just said bad things about the Herreshoffs, but it's amazing. Like, we've had long-term sustained CPC projects that have gone through media and communication, and like, Anne Proctor did something with like art history with them. So there's been long and sustained projects with partners. I know the Newport Restoration Foundation, I wasn't able to teach the history class again, but Historic Preservation have partnered with them again. I think what else was I going to say? Yeah, I feel like some of these long-term partnerships are really what is exciting for me with CPC, to be able to build that. And I'm hopeful this project with the Narragansett is going to be part of the class for this semester, but maybe the start of something really quite special between the tribe and Roger Williams University. So I think the ultimate high is where can it go for the student? Where can it go for me as a professor, right? It's so exciting to be part of these moments where the students are like, I get it, I absolutely get it. And the low moments where the students are like, this is horrific, I've just spent 3 hours reading stuff that I don't understand, and the bit I need from the document is ripped. Like, what do you want from me? I've got nothing from today. And I'm like, yeah, that's your job as a historian, right? Especially as an early Americanist. I was like, at least you're not a medievalist, at least it's in English and not Latin, and you don't have to fly to France to read the charters, so suck it up. So I feel like for me to be part of that journey is really really important for them to see that real world when I have students who say, I want to be a medievalist. I'm like, no, you don't. You think you do. You're caught up in the romance, but you don't want to learn Latin. You don't want to learn medieval shorthand Latin. You don't want to spend half your life in Europe, do you? Like in the archives? No. So be an early Americanist and take class with me, right? I'll show you how to do it. Thankfully, at the moment, we don't, well, not thankfully, but unthankfully, we don't have a medievalist in the department. So they've got this romanticized version of that. And so for me, it can really, the final point, the thing that for CPC is, it really does train them to be historians, right? And make these kind of anecdotal comments about, you know, they're in the archives with me, but they really are. They see that high and they see that low. So yeah, I've got probably 10 minutes before we have to dash off for some questions. I know it's a little bit all over the place, but hopefully I got across the way I integrate it and some of the highs and lows. So does anyone have any questions? Laura?
So, as always, your passion is intoxicating, and I would take any class with you because I would totally follow that passion. But I do wonder, as you're thinking about the applicability of CPC projects to courses beyond history, because it's obviously so relevant to history, but like when you're thinking about core and the possibility of it being every student, is CPC for every student?
No, probably not, is the honest answer. I feel like even within history where they're swept away trying to be historians, there are some are like, I just want to sit in your class and take some notes, and I want to read like the nicely edited collection of primary sources that someone else has already sifted through. I don't want to be that person. So yeah, core's going to be really interesting. I don't know how it's going to go. I'm hopeful that most of them will be swept along on the enthusiasm for Roger, right? I feel like the fact that it's a Roger Williams project is gonna, and it's a Roger seminar, and they'll already know quite a bit about Roger, that should alleviate it. I'm also doing reacting to the past in that, so they'll already be in the 17th century moment, so I think that should get them excited, but absolutely not. I feel like there's students who don't enjoy it, who find it too much work, and yeah, just don't like history, especially in core. I'm doing everything, Laura. I'm doing a CPC project, and because I didn't have enough already in my core, I thought I'll mix it up and throw a CPC project in there as well.
Good for you.
Not really, but thanks. Yeah, Arnold.
I think your talk really illustrates about a program growing its understanding of what moments within the curricular path are appropriate for community engagement. And so, you know, I think many of us have had the experience that if you were to take a freshman who was saying, I'm going to be majoring in American Studies or history, that's my passion. That is absolutely true. But until they have taken those basic fundamental courses, both core but within the discipline, it's irresponsible of us to put them in a situation where they're engaging with the community until they reach that point where they're ready to interact with the partner, handle those documents, be an arbiter of information, and make that reading as this sort of 1825 or 1850.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we're seeing the university grow. Graphic design did that very conscious thought. Where does the course, citizen designer, and CPC course belong within our curriculum? You guys are now evolving that. Other programs are doing that.
Yeah.
And it's specific to every discipline.
Yeah, it really is. And I think we've, as you say, been quite deliberate about, this is a 300-400 level class, right? This is where it fits. You need to have taken all of these classes. You need these background skills to be able to do this successfully. The core class, I sound a bit blasé about it. I'm absolutely not. I'm really nervous about paleography and like non-majors, and so they're going to look at the originals, but between me and you and I guess the camera, I already have a very clear framework for what I want on those words, so they're going to work with me, but I am really, in a way I probably wouldn't with my history majors 300 levels. I'm going to kind of really monitor the parameters where they go with it. I'm going to spoon feed them in the core a lot more than I would with the history students. I'm like, hey, come to the archives, let's figure this out. So I think trying to be really thoughtful about making it successful and appropriate to the students, right? These core people are freshmen as well. So yeah. Any more questions? Okay, well, if anyone does have any more questions, then you have my email address. Please send me an email. My office is over in GHH. All right, thank you.